The CEO didn't read what he signed. I watched him do it. No questions. No pause. No hesitation. Just a quick glance at the top line, then his pen moved. Smooth and certain. Like this was routine. Like I was routine. Something small. Something replaceable. Around the table. No one reacted. Not really. A few lowered their eyes. One person shifted in their chair. That was it. Because everyone in that room understood something I didn't want to admit yet. This wasn't a meeting, it was a setup. We're outsourcing your project, Celeste said, already standing at the head of the table like she belonged there. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at him. Owen Wren, CEO. I'm not agreeing to that, I said. My voice was calm, controlled. But I felt it just under the surface. That sharp edge you get when you realize you've already lost the room. Celeste smiled. Just slightly. Then resign. No build-up. No explanation. Just a clean push off the edge. A few people shifted again. No one spoke. Not even the ones who knew exactly what this program was, or what it would cost to mishandle it. I looked at Owen. He didn't stop her, didn't ask legal to step in, didn't ask me a single question. He just waited. That was when I understood. This wasn't about strategy. It was about removing me. So I reached into my folder and pulled out the letter I had already prepared. I slid it across the table. No speech, no defense. For a second, just one, I almost said something. Almost reminded him what would happen if this went through the wrong way. But I've been in rooms like this long enough. People don't hear warnings when they've already made a decision. Owen picked up the letter, skimmed the first line. Signed. That fast, like clearing a minor inconvenience. The room exhaled. Subtle. Quiet. Relieved. They thought it was over. It wasn't. My name is Raina Holloway. I'm 39 years old, and I've spent 6 years building a system no one in that room actually understood. Not the way I did. Because if I left the wrong way, the entire contract wouldn't transition. It would freeze. Immediately. I stood, nodded once, and walked out. No one followed. No one stopped me. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop. Attached is the signed letter. Typed one short message, not to HR, to the only office that actually needed to see it. Then I hit send, because they thought they had just removed me from a project. But in less than 24 hours, they were about to understand what that signature really triggered. So tell me what happens when a CEO signs something he was never supposed to approve in the first place. And as always, this story is a work of fiction, created by the Her Fear team for storytelling purposes. It didn't start in that room. By the time she told me to resign, most of the work had already been done, quietly, cleanly, in ways no one ever writes down, but everyone follows. The first shift was small. A weekly review I had led for years opened without me. No handoff, no acknowledgement. She just started talking. Framing the agenda, reordering priorities, tightening the narrative until there was no space left for mine. By the time I spoke, I was reacting, not leading. The room adjusted faster than I expected. People stopped looking at me first. Then they stopped looking at me at all. Even the ones who used to come to me first, stopped. The next week, my seat changed, but no announcement, just slightly off center, a little farther from the screen, closer to the edge. Then the deck. My team still built it. I still reviewed every line, but when it opened, it wasn't my voice guiding them through the logic. It was hers. Let's keep this high level, she said, cutting me off mid-sentence. High level. That was the new word for removing control. We need someone who can move faster, she added once, almost casually. No one challenged it, no one corrected her. Not even the people who knew I was right. Owen called it alignment. Leadership needs to speak with one voice. Like that explained everything. It didn't. A few days later, there was a security session I wasn't invited to. I joined halfway through, just in time to answer a question no one else could. Then I was quiet again. Emails changed too. Raina's team delivered became the program delivered. Ownership blurred, then it disappeared. Janine caught me staring at one of them. Don't push, she said. They'll make you the problem before you can explain why you're right. Brielle didn't warn me. She showed me meeting invites, file ownership, access logs, who opened, who closed, who spoke first. It was all there. That this wasn't one decision. It was a system. And systems like that don't remove you all at once. They teach everyone else to stop seeing you first. I almost pushed back, almost corrected the record while it still mattered. But I've seen what happens to people who react too early. So I didn't. Because this wasn't about control anymore. It was about something far more dangerous. They were getting comfortable touching something they didn't understand. They hadn't taken the project from me, but they had already started teaching the company I didn't belong to anymore. So what happens when the system forgets who it actually depends on? She didn't come after me directly. She didn't need to. She changed the language. And once the language shifts, the room follows. The first time I said continuity risk, she nodded like she agreed, calm, neutral, almost supportive. Then she tilted it. So we're seeing some resistance to change, she said, glancing at Owen. Just like that, same sentence, different meanings. I corrected it. Even tone, no edge. This isn't about change. If I'm removed without approval, the contract freezes. Immediately. She smiled. Of course. But we can't let legacy thinking slow us down. Legacy thinking? Oh, that was new. The next week, it sharpened. I raised chain of custody requirements. She called it over-engineering. I flagged federal handling constraints. She called it inflexibility. Then, softer, worse. I think you're taking this a bit personally. We need objectivity here. A few people looked down. No one pushed back. Each shift was small. Just enough. Enough that people stopped asking me questions and started asking her instead, until I sounded like the one holding things back. Then Owen started using her words. Are we being too rigid here, rigid? Not precise, not necessary? Rigid. I felt it settle into the room. A deck my team built came back with edits. Clean, subtle, required controls became recommended safeguards. Dependencies became considerations. The structure was still mine, but the meaning wasn't. Brielle showed me both versions side by side. No commentary. She didn't need to. Janine leaned in my doorway later that afternoon. They don't remember accuracy, she said. They remember the tone. I knew that. I also knew something worse. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was definition. And once that version of me settled in, every warning I gave would sound like defense, not truth. I almost pushed back. I almost corrected it in the room while it still mattered, but I've seen what happens when you react too early. So I stopped. Not because I was wrong, because I could feel the frame closing. And once it locked, even being right wouldn't help anymore. What happens when the truth starts sounding like resistance instead of warning? That's when it stopped being subtle and started being dangerous. She pushed for a vendor readiness review before we had federal sign-off. Not suggested. Not floated. Pushed. We need to move faster, she said. We can't wait on every layer. Every layer. That was her way of describing rules she didn't want to follow. I was asked to prepare architecture summaries for external evaluation. Clean versions, transferable versions, stripped versions. I read the request twice before answering. These aren't transition materials. I said, these are controlled records. If these move outside approved channels, the contract freezes. She didn't argue. She renamed them transition packet. She wrote in the next thread, same files, new label, and once the label changes, the handling changes with it. That's how mistakes become policy. Inside the company, the shift continued. I wasn't the continuity anchor anymore. I was the program lead. A role. Something you could replace with a meeting and a signature. There was a legal security prep session I wasn't invited to. I found out through a forwarded link. Joined halfway through, and they were already deep in it. Just streamlining communication. Someone said, fewer voices, leadership clarity, the usual language people use when they've already decided who matters. Janine told me not to focus on titles, focus on impact. But this wasn't about titles. Brielle saw it clearly. They're not just renaming your role, she said quietly. They're rewriting it in the record. That was the part no one else understood. If they removed me like this, it wouldn't register as a controlled transition. It would register as a personnel change. And that's where everything breaks. Not loudly, but permanently. I started pulling everything together. Not to fight, to preserve the truth, because they weren't just replacing me. They were building a version of events where I had never been essential at all. So tell me what happens when the official record starts telling a version of the story that was never true. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't escalate. I asked for a private meeting. He agreed quickly, like this was routine. Something he could clear in 15 minutes and move on from. No audience, no interruption, just the two of us. I didn't sit right away. I laid the documents out first. Clean, aligned, real. This isn't a standard program, but I said, "You know that." Why, he nodded. "I do." "Then you also know this isn't a staffing decision. If I'm removed without approval, the contract freezes immediately." He leaned back. "We're not removing anyone," he said. "We're restructuring." That distinction doesn't exist on their side. I kept my tone even. No pressure, no edge. If I resign or if you reassign me without proper clearance, it triggers review. Not internal, external. He didn't interrupt. That was the problem. He wasn't dismissing me. He just wasn't adjusting. "Legal will handle the paperwork," he said finally. There it was. Not ignorance, distance. The kind that comes from years of decisions being cleaned up after the fact. I watched him for a second. "You're treating this like documentation." I said, "It's not." He gave me that look, the one that ends a conversation without saying it. I almost pushed harder, almost forced him to see what he was about to sign. But I've seen what happens when you push at the wrong moment. So I stopped. Later that day, the language shifted again. Now I was protective of legacy structure, struggling to transition, too close to the old model. Janine caught me before I responded. "Don't," she said. "You push now. You prove them right." So I didn't, because I had already done the only thing that mattered. I had told him. Clearly, directly, without noise, and he had heard me. He just chose not to change anything. That's when I understood the next mistake they make won't be something they can explain later. "So tell me, what do you call it when a warning is heard when does and still ignored?" That was the moment it crossed the line. Up until then, everything could still be reframed, softened, walked back. This couldn't. She pushed the vendor track forward without sign-off, not carefully, not conditionally, as if approval would come later. "We need transition language ready," she said. "We can't wait." Transition. Again, she asked for documentation that assumed the change had already been accepted. Not reviewed. Accepted. The draft came 2 days later. I read it once. Then again, they had written my role like it could be reassigned internally. Clean handoff, no friction, no continuity designation, no controlled handling, no dependency chain, just a role. Replaceable. I didn't argue, I documented. "This classification is incorrect," I wrote. "If processed this way, it triggers external review." She responded within minutes. "Noted. We'll refine it." But it didn't stop. The document kept moving. He let it pass through review like it was incomplete. "Not wrong. Legal will tighten the language, papa," he said. "Later. Always later. That's how people convince themselves the risk isn't real yet." I closed the file, sat with it. This wasn't about positioning anymore. They had filed the wrong kind of paperwork for the wrong kind of system. And once it enters the record, it doesn't disappear. It stays. Brielle saw it immediately. "If this is processed as written," she said quietly, "it becomes unauthorized personnel handling. Not a mistake. A violation. I didn't sign anything. Didn't approve any version. Instead, I opened a new document. My resignation letter. Then another window. A draft email. Not to HR, not to leadership, to the only place that actually needed to know. I didn't write it out of anger. I wrote it to be precise, because for the first time, I wasn't protecting the system from them anymore. I was preparing to inform the system about them. That's when they lost control. What happens when the truth gets reported? Exactly the way it should be. It happened exactly the way they wanted. Fast, clean, public. She stood at the head of the table like the decision had already been approved somewhere above all of us. "We're outsourcing your project. No discussion. Just ownership taken." "I'm not agreeing to that," I said. Calm, flat. She didn't pause. Then resign. There it was. Simple. Final. A few people shifted. No one spoke. I reached into my folder and placed the letter on the table. No speech, no defense. For a second, I considered stopping him, reminding him one last time what that signature would trigger. But I didn't. He picked it up, glanced at the first line, signed. That fast. Like he was clearing something minor. The room relaxed. Subtle. Quiet. They thought it was done. I folded the paper once and walked out. No one followed. No one stopped me. At my desk, I opened my laptop, attached the letter, typed one message. Short. Precise. If I leave without approval, the contract freezes. This change had not been approved by the The program was now in violation. I sent it, but not to HR, to the only office that actually mattered. No delay, no escalation chain, just the truth. Inside the building, it moved like any resignation. Until it reached legal. Silas didn't sit when he read it. He stood, read it again, then called Owen. She can't resign, not shouldn't. Can't, because that letter wasn't a resignation. It was an unauthorized personnel event. On the other end, silence. For the first time that he understood something had already happened, not something he could fix, something he had already approved. By the time legal grasped it, my email had been received, logged, acknowledged. No version of this stayed internal anymore. No language could soften it. It was already where it needed to be. What happens when the clock starts and no one knows how to stop it? They didn't have time to fix it. That was the first thing I saw when I walked in the next morning. No new narrative, no overnight explanation, just tension. Legal was already pulling documents, continuity clauses, notification chains, handling requirements. Too late. Once the notice is logged, the process moves. It doesn't wait. By mid-morning, they arrived. No announcement. 2 agents. Plain clothes. Calm. They asked for access to the CEO's office. No one raised their voice. That made it worse. Inside, the questions were simple. Who approved the change? Where was the authorization? When was the authority notified? Short questions. No good answers. He took longer than usual before speaking, because the answers weren't complicated. They just didn't exist. That's when it hit him. He hadn't signed a resignation. He had triggered a violation. Silas tried to contain it. Adjust language. Clarify intent. But intent doesn't matter once it's on record. Not here. Brielle provided everything, timeline, documents, version history, not to accuse, to show. And once it lined up, the pattern was clear. Not one mistake, a sequence. She tried once more. This is being overinterpreted. It's a restructuring. No one supported her. Not this time. Because the room had shifted. The language that once made me sound difficult now made them look reckless. Silence filled the space, not confusion, recognition. By the time the agent sat across from him, no one believed this was recoverable. Not anymore. Because they finally understood something simple. If I leave the wrong way, the contract freezes. Immediately. And they had already made that happen. What do you call it when the truth finally shows up? With authority. There was no room for interpretation anymore. No tone to adjust. No language to soften. Just a record. The hearing wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was precise. Federal oversight, contracting authority, legal, executive leadership. Everyone is in the same room. And for the first time, no one was managing perception. Only facts. Why was a continuity-cleared individual removed from the program? The question landed clean. Owen answered first. Operational restructuring. On what basis? Silence. No one in that room would ever look at them the same way again. Celeste stepped in. We were optimizing delivery. Was continuity authorization obtained? Another pause. Because that answer didn't exist. They moved methodically. Who approved the change? Where the notification chain was documented? What legal basis supported the transition? Every answer led to the same place. Nowhere. I didn't need to say much. Everything was already there. The timeline, the language shifts, the document that reclassified my role, the signed letter, the email confirming the break, piece by piece. It formed a straight line. Not confusion, not miscommunication, a decision, and a system that allowed it. Celeste tried again. This was a strategic. It was a violation. The contracting authority said, even final. That ended it. The contract was terminated. Immediately. Penalty clauses triggered. Not just the program. Everything connected to it. If I leave without approval, the contract freezes. They had been told. Clearly. They ignored it anyway. Now it was happening. Losses followed. Withdrawals. Suspensions. Exposure. Then silence. The kind that comes after damage. Within weeks. It collapsed. Aetheris didn't recover. It folded. Owen wasn't given a choice. He was removed. Celeste wasn't repositioned. She was named. What followed wasn't internal. It was legal. Because this wasn't about one mistake. It was about what that mistake revealed. He signed without understanding. She acted without knowing the rules. And together they broke the one thing they thought they controlled. When accountability finally arrives, what does it take with it? I got a letter. Federal inquiry. My name is listed as a witness. That was it. Just confirmation. Everything had gone exactly where it was always going to go. By then, the company was already collapsing. Quietly. That's how real consequences happen. No headlines, no announcements, just structure giving way. When I sat down with the investigators, no one raised their voice. Walk us through your role. They didn't need me to. They already had everything. Clear, documented, final, because there was nothing left to argue. I had done my job. Even when the people above me decided they didn't need to understand it, I saw their names again later. Not in meetings, at a hearing, no titles, no authority, just answers they couldn't give. It ended without noise, no final statement, no clean exit, just over. They asked if I would return. I didn't. I stepped away instead. No urgency, no pressure. For the first time in years, I didn't need to explain anything. I just needed rest. And maybe that's the part people miss. In a place where power moves faster than understanding, the damage doesn't start when something breaks. It starts when people stop checking. You didn't lose the company. You just never understood what you were signing. So tell me, who do you think is truly responsible?